everyone, this is Joe Workman, and in this video, we're going to be looking at the QuickFlip 4 demo and exactly how I built out all the animations. So let's dive in. Now, before we dive into this demo, I thought it would be good to show you how you can implement QuickFlip 4 just from scratch. Okay, so here I've added just a blank default QuickFlip 4 stack to the page. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy in these pictures just to keep things a little simpler for us. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's do like 128. Okay, just to keep things a little simple. And I'm going to go ahead and click this plus button, and that adds another QuickFlip side. And I can go ahead and copy this other picture stack into there. And those are huge. Let's just shrink it down a little bit for us. Whoops. Let's do 256. Okay. All right, and on both of these, I'm going to go ahead and set we'll center the images. Perfect. Okay, so here I have a QuickFlip card. I have two sides of my card. We'll keep it simple, just having two sides. We'll look on later on how we can add multiple sides. And I'm just going to leave the settings as the default, and let's preview. And there we go. As I hover over, we'll see that it flips by default, and when I hover back, it flips backwards. And that's it. Okay. So that's implementing a QuickFlip from scratch. Okay. Let's go ahead and now we're going to dive into the settings, and let's look at some of the settings defined inside this QuickFlip demo. So here I have very similar setup to what we just did. Okay. I have in a 4 column, I have these 4 QuickFlip stacks. Each of them has different cards or sides of a card. Okay. They're just images. So we'll look at this first QuickFlip stack, and we'll notice it uses something very similar to what the default settings are. It's not very different. We're flipping horizontally. So if we look at this, we can flip either vertically or horizontally. And then what is this lift setting? So this lift setting allows you to either raise the card up or inset the card into the page as it's animating. So let's have a look at that. So if we look at this leftmost card here, when I hover over it, if you notice, it actually goes in, and as it flips back, it animates back up, right? So it adds depth or a 3-dimensional aspect to the animation, okay? If the flip was set to 0, let's go ahead and set that to 0 on this animation, okay? We'll see that we get that flipping animation, but it doesn't have that depth, that 3-dimensional feel to it, okay? So with lift, if we add a negative number, it will go into the page, and if we add a positive number, as this example here does, it will lift out of the page. Okay, let's set that back to negative 100. Okay. This next setting, the ability to shuffle sides. Now here I only have 2 sides, so obviously shuffling between 2 sides isn't too exciting. But we can play with this further on when we look at multiple sides, how you can shuffle them. And this next is the effect. Okay, and this has to do with the animation timing. Okay. So you can play around with these effects. Some of them are interesting. If we look further on, I think in this example, I change it up a little bit. But you can definitely play around with these settings. You'll notice that with the timing curve inside out, whether or not it starts slower and goes faster. In the in and out, it starts slow, goes fast, and then ends slow. Okay. And then with the out, it actually starts off slow and then finishes, or starts off fast and finishes slow. Okay, so that's kind of how the in and out happens. And if you look at this tooltip here, I do have links to a doc here that I recommend you checking out if you want to learn more about these animation timing things. So if we check out these exact documentations, you'll notice that a lot of these this graph kind of shows us, and you can tweak either power 0 through power 3, and you can change whether or not you want in, out, or out. And if you change that, you can kind of see how the animation timing happens. Okay, so this is a great utility. And again, I got to this URL through the URL in the tooltips of those settings. Okay, so let's further down. Let's go down to our animation timing. Here I've made it a little bit faster than the default. The default is 1,000 milliseconds, which is the same as 1 second. So by setting this to 500 milliseconds, it's a half-second animation. So I think that gives us a nice kind of a quick animation here. I like that. Next, we have our interactions, okay? And here we'll notice that when I have it set to pointer in, that says I'm going to flip forward when I hover over. So pointer in was when your mouse hovers over the object. Pointer out is what animation do you want to trigger when it hovers off the object. Click obviously means what happens when you click, and in view is when it scrolls into view, or if it's already in view on page load, it will animate exactly on page load. Okay, so here, if we look at this example, this one on the far left, when I hover in, we're going forward. When I hover out, we're going backwards. And then also when I click, I can just keep on clicking it and we'll continue to animate forward. And if we look at the options for these settings, we'll see that they're all the same. You can either do nothing, you can go forward, go backward. You can play, which means if you have repeating loops going on, which we'll show in a little bit, you can start that animation. You can pause a looping animation, and then you can either toggle, you can play or pause. So if it's paused, it'll play. If it's playing, it will pause, okay? And we have those options for every single one of these. Now, there is one different. In Click, we have one more option called dynamic navigation, which we'll show you in a little bit. Cool. So let's dive into some of these other ones really quick. We'll see that this second example uses a vertical flip, okay, instead of horizontal. So in the second example, it's just vertically flipping instead of using the horizontal axis. Here I've set the animation timing to be the same, and the pointer in and out both goes backwards. So instead of flipping the opposite direction on hover out, it's actually just keep on flipping the same direction. So that kind of gives you, again, the flexibility to determine what animation you want and how you want users to interact with the object. Now, in this third example, we can see that I have enabled some detailed settings. So a button that I skipped is this little plus button. And when you enable it, it enables some more fine-grained custom solutions. And what we'll see here is I set this to flip horizontally, but by default, when you flip horizontally, it flips it 180 degrees, so a half circle. But when you enable these custom settings, you can actually define custom degrees. So in this case, I set it to 540, which is the same thing as a 1.5 complete gyrations. Okay, so it's going to go 360 plus 180. Okay, so that when I hover over, it does a 1.5 complete turns. Okay, and it flips on the back. And when I hover out, it does nothing. And I have it set so that animation only happens when you hover onto the object. Okay, or if you click. Okay, so we'll see here in the interactions, I have it set to pointer in forward, pointer out do nothing, click go forward, and in view do nothing. So again, that only is when I hover over, it's going to animate. When I hover out, it does nothing. When I hover over, it does something, and then when I click, it'll animate. Now let's focus on this last one. And if we notice here, when I hover over, it starts an animation that's infinite. Okay, and it just keeps on flipping and flipping and flipping. And when I hover out, it completes that animation and then stops. Okay, so let's look at the settings for that fourth one. So here, you'll notice that I'm doing a horizontal flip. I have the lift set to 0 because I don't want it to be gyrating. As it repeats, you don't want it to be keep on going in and out of the page. Okay, so in this case, the lift is not what I want. Now, when you're doing an infinite animation like that, you can play around with different effects. I recommend keeping it to linear power 0. That will give you that constant animation. It's just linear. Okay. And then we set the duration. So how much is one full animation? I wanted it kind of on the slower side. So we're going to do 1 second. Okay. And here we'll notice that I set my repeat. On all the other ones, it was set to none. But in this example, I set it to be forward. Okay. And so that means when the repeat happens, we're going to go forward. If I had set this to be backwards, the card would animate in the opposite direction. Okay. So we want to go forward, and I want it to be start paused on page load because so we're going to start this paused, and we'll see that in the interactions is when we actually set it to play. So by default, the repeat times is set to -1, and that says essentially infinite repeats, okay? However, you can set this to be a specific repeat time. And so in this case, if I set this to 3, it'll animate 3 times and then stop. Now we have 2 different times for looping. The first is going to be a start delay. And both of these values, you can supply a minimum and a maximum. And the reason for that is this is so you can randomly choose times. Okay, so let's say if I did a start delay of 1,000 to 2,000, what is going to happen is it will randomly pick a time between those two as the delay. Okay, now if you want to make sure that the delay is a specific amount, just simply set both of these values to be identical, and then you won't get any sort of random time. Okay, so again, start delay is how long to wait until the animation begins. And then wait time is basically a pause in between each animation. So after it animates, it will pause until it goes again. Now, obviously, this particular animation, I wanted all of this set to 0. I wanted 0 start delay and then 0 wait time in between each animation because I just wanted it to be infinitely animating. Now, if we look at our interactions here, we'll see that on pointer in, I play. On pointer out, I pause. Now, if you remember, it paused, but it still completed the animation until it reached the next stopping point. Okay, so it won't pause halfway through the animation. It will complete the current animation and then pause. Next is click and in view. We're going to do nothing. All right, let's move on and look at this multi-side flipping card. Okay, pretty cool. So as you see in this demo, we're going to be flipping through this, and you'll see that there's multiple sides. And that's really simple to do. So when I built out this QuickFlip 4, each side, again, has that QuickFlip side. But now instead of just a picture, I actually have an entire, content area. So I have a picture and some text. Okay. Now in this case, I'm using some Foundation 6 swatches. These aren't required, but I'm using some swatches to actually apply some styles, such as background color and border radiuses. But if you're not using Foundation 6 or swatches, then you can just style these out however you know how to do that. Okay. So in this case, here I have multiple sides, and you'll notice that each side has a different image. I changed the title in it so that we can explicitly see that each one is different. Okay. But here, the point is you can see that we're animating not just images, but an entire content layout. And the animation here is pretty much the same, right? I mean, I just chose flipping. I have a -50 pixel lift. And here we are using the dynamic navigation on click, which I kind of skipped over earlier. And so what is that? Again, I mentioned how that was something special just for clicking. So if we preview this, we'll notice that when I click on the right side, it will animate forward. And when I click on the left side, it animates backwards. So it gives you this dynamic navigation where you can easily go from left and right, so forward and back, just by clicking on the different sides of the QuickFlip stack. Now, what you'll also notice in this demo is I have in view set to be forward. Okay, so that means whenever this particular card scrolls into view, it will animate once. And this is good because a lot of times it gives someone a hint that this element is interactable. I can actually interact with this element. So as I'm scrolling out of the page and I scroll in, we'll notice that it animates. And it gives me that clue that, hey, maybe I can play around with this object, right? So then I can start clicking on it and stuff like that. So that's how we can use in-view animations to give our users clues as to an element can actually be interacted with. And if we look at the in-view settings, we can customize when an element is actually triggered. So what this means is when the bottom of my element, so in this case, when the bottom of the card reaches 90% from the bottom of the browser, it will animate. Okay, so if I scroll down and as I animate in, when the bottom of this card reaches 90% of the browser height, it will animate. Okay, so you can customize that. You can make it so that when it reaches 100%, which is the very bottom, right? So right when it reaches the bottom, it should animate. Okay, so we have customization. And if you set this to top, it'll trigger when the top of the element reaches that point. Okay, the last thing I want to review in this video is external controls. And here I have buttons that allow me to click these, and I can easily, click forward and backwards on this particular card. So let's have a look. So inside this QuickFlip 4 instance, we'll notice that in the external interaction classes settings, we have different classes. So I changed the default for these values to be QF forward card and QF backward card. Okay. I didn't want, in this case, buttons for play, pause, and play, pause. So I just left those at the default. And if we look here, I'm using buttons. And all I did is I added the class to the button that I wanted to trigger that action. So in this case, QF forward card, when I click this button, it will trigger that forward action on this instance of QuickFlip. And on the backwards button, I set the simply QF backward card. So whenever someone clicks this, it triggers the backward action on this card. Now here I'm using buttons, but you can add a class to really anything that you want, okay? It could be a picture, it could be a one column, whatever you add a class to, it doesn't need to be a button or a link. That just by adding that class to anything will cause clicking it to actually trigger the QuickFlip function. Now, just to show you that these buttons can control one or multiple QuickFlips at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and copy this QuickFlip instance into this 2 column. Okay, so let me just minimize those. So here I have 3 QuickFlip instances. Okay, and they all have the same forward and backward classes set inside their interaction classes settings. So all 3 of these QuickFlips are set to be flipped based on the same class. So now if I preview this, we'll notice that when I click this button, all 3 of them flip at the same time. So that just shows you how we can use controls to control one or multiple instances of QuickFlip. So there we go. I hope that shows you a lot of the power of what the QuickFlip 4 stack can do for you. We reviewed pretty much everything except the QuickFlip swatch. So we're going to do a separate video on that. Go ahead and make sure if you want to know more on that, check it out. And I hope you enjoy QuickFlip. Go forth and make your websites great. Bye.